only has created a huge and impressive body of work in that time, he has also given much to the RMS. He's the past president, present librarian, and I don't know what else. His lovely wife Julie did the newsletter for years. They've been big contributors. And this is going to be a really nice demonstration. So join me in welcoming Brock Smith. Yeah!
Thank you. This is pretty awesome being here with you guys and in this place. When I first started blacksmithing, I didn't know about Rocky Mountain Smiths, and I kind of just clunked along trying to teach myself. My great-grandfather, when I was a little boy, inspired me, and I said, this is what I want to do. And honestly, since I was 4 or 5 years old, I wanted to do blacksmithing, but I used to say, but I want to be an artist too. And at that time, in my vision, the two didn't work together, but here we are. When I heard about Rocky Mountain Smiths, there was another blacksmith that I competed against on a job in Telluride. And I won the contract, did the job. He came kind of grouching to meet me and asked me where I learned, and I said, right here. I don't know anything. I'm just teaching myself as I go. I had Jack Andrews, The Edge of the Anvil. It's an excellent book. And there's a new version, not new anymore, but excellent book. You should have it. Just do the steps in there, and it'll take you far. So my competitor, Bruce, told me about a conference in Carbondale. And Julie and I couldn't afford it, but we sent me here. And I saw, my first demonstrator was Clay Spencer. And I was blown away by that man, and I still am. He transformed my work. I raised 4 kids doing this, and it's not been easy. But what this group has done for me is huge, and I am truly grateful. I didn't study with Francis. I wasn't one of his students, but every time I was here and he spoke, I listened. And James said it a little bit ago, but one thing that Francis said, and I hear myself saying it over and over, is nothing is hidden. And for us, we work in a pretty high-end market, and our clients like very nice things, and so we really try to do that. And I say what Francis said many times, nothing is hidden. And now Lee, my son, I'll be looking, trying to decide, and he's like, no, let's get that right. So it's really important. When you're forging, if something's not square, if you're not happy with it, Allison wanted to change that twist. Do it right now. Whatever it takes, make it right. If you go on and leave a mistake, inside your head, you'll be hesitating the whole time, wanting to go back, but you keep pressing forward. At some point, either regret or wisdom's going to win. If you've gone a long way, you have to go back. And that could be days, and you're paying for that, not your clients. Francis used to talk about that, the honor in the way you charge. We're busy in a time when a lot of people aren't, and I really believe Julie runs our books very carefully. She is very honest, and that pays. And Francis used to say that. I agree with him wholeheartedly. Don't charge your clients for your mistakes. Don't charge them to learn. I charge for tools. I don't think he did. But those are some things that I got from right here. When I was young, I worked in a fabrication shop where we built railing, lots of railing. And it was aluminum. We had many products, but that was our primary line. And the engineers weren't careful. They kept putting plus or minus everywhere. And I learned a big lesson from them because I was production manager. Everybody that worked in that shop producing worked for me. And so every mistake was mine. Plus or minuses, those guys didn't work for me. I could not tell them what to do. And I learned how to measure and lay out because they didn't. They knew, they were highly educated and intelligent, but they didn't care. And so all of us worker bees had to constantly rework and rework. And so this fixture might look like a lot for a scrawny little piece of handrail, but if you make it right the first time, there you are, you make money. And the other thing about making it right and finding a way that works and doing it that way every time is you'll be faster. I find if I haven't drawn something fully, even if it's an artistic piece, I want to know where I'm headed. If I haven't really got a full plan in my mind, when I come to the fire, I'm wasting heats. I'm making scale. Wow, that's good. And so know where you're headed, make a plan, and then go for it. And you can work fast, you can be productive, and you can make money blacksmithing. Is that thing hot?
No, I turned it down. So it's pretty warm though.
What we're doing, we just did a really nice French railing, traditional, forged. All of it was collars, drilled and tapped assembly, some tenons, beautiful. Every bar was completely worked. The cap was a 3-bar laminate. The top rail, every single piece. And the client loved that full detail. We came to the exterior and there were 4 sets of stairs coming into the home. They all had similar handrails to this. This is actually the form built for 1/2 of one stairway. So there's a left and a right. I always, when I'm on the outside, I look at the house and I view it from the outside looking in. Every drawing I do, I've been doing that for 30 years, so I don't confuse myself. This is the left side, the right side's over here, matching. When you walk up to these, I don't care where you look at them from, these handrails and the other 3 sets all match. They're exact, or as near as you can do. And we work to plus or minus a 16th. We work in 30 seconds doing hot work, and you can do it. You can definitely, yes, and very, very doable. So the form is worth the time. First thing I do, I start drawing it, and I've got some handouts that we can give you guys. Yeah. That show there's 3 pages for I should have split them and started. I didn't number them. They show the field measurements, so a pencil sketch done on site. And Lee just reminded me, date your work. When you go back to a file, sometimes the job will stop for some reason, and it's really important to know when you did that work in the job because changes have been made, and you can place that drawing in the schedule. When I don't do it, I regret it. So date your drawings. Probably those don't have them. Whether you're measuring for something with a helix or just a straight stair rail, there's a few things that you have to know. You want to know where you're attaching the railing. Does it attach to a wall or a column? Is it attaching to posts? Is there going to be brackets mounted on the wall? You have to find those. You have to find out what are you going to secure to. Find out what's in that wall. If you show up with a finished piece and you can't place it there, now what? You're spending money reworking your piece. So up front, find out what's in the wall or whatever you're attaching to. This rail, and we have some photos we can. This is the back of the main wing of the home, and right here are these two little handrails. They're made just the same as the ones out front, and then there's another set. And so they attach to a column, and they attach to a post. So I know where I'm going. I go out to the site, take my field measurements. I need one of these. I take my field measurements and I make sure that I get all of the dimensions of the stair. Each tread, its run, its rise, the overall. This one's small, but if you have 6 treads or 8 treads, get the full length. You want to know, go ahead, in this particular home, it's all limestone block. And so I needed to check the right height and location, make sure I wasn't too close to an edge of piece of limestone. I would have to adjust where I'm going. So get all of those, your foundation first. Know where you're going, get that. Mark it on your drawing. Draw it, take pictures of it if you want that. And then I do a plan view and an elevation. And when I get back to the shop, I know what I have. So you'll need relationship from the first nose, the top nose of the stair, and the bottom nose to the building, wherever you're attaching. On here, if you look, you'll see all of those things. I've marked the center line of the column. That's where the handrail bends out at a 90, comes to the nose of the stair, and then breaks and bends down. That railing comes out, bends down. It's a straight rake right here. Then it has a helical bend, and then it levels out where it meets the post. There's a forged 2-inch ball that rests on top of the handrail right here, and the post goes down. So I need those locations. We checked them, made sure. There's heat tubes in here. That was a real drag, but we overcame that. This railing, because it turns, we were following, there's 4 sets of these. Everything had to harmonize. They weren't all the same. The stairs were each different, but our bend was designed to follow the corners of the stairs. So this bend takes us right here. This last little bit of railing is on the 45. If you look at the field measurement drawing, that's corner to corner of the stairs. And so it's just a short distance, but when you look at it, it all lines up just right. So I've got all of those measurements. I show it in elevation. I used to just draw a plan view and then out to the side write my elevation numbers, but I wouldn't remember what was what necessarily. And so I quit doing that. I always draw both views. And if you have more information you really need, draw it, get it. Going back to the job is just a waste of money again. So taking those extra steps at every phase pays. It's not more expensive to take your time and do it right, it's less. To build this form, I basically drew the handrail in plan view, looking down on a steel plate. That's exactly what I did. I drew it on this steel plate. We have several of these. They weld to a table in front of our forge, and we do a lot of bent work. We do a lot of helical bends, and so that table, we even forge on it half the time. The anvils are next to it, and bigger bars, it's really a sweet table. But these plates come down, we spray paint them black. We buy a dozen cans of flat black aerosol, paint your plate. It'll save you so much time. Your lines show up. These lines were done a month ago, and they're still clear. Silver pencil. It's a really good trick. Our jig, we spray paint it, so all of our layout marks just show up. That'll save you time. You'll like that. So then I just start going through my bone pile. I knew I wanted a 4-inch diameter, 2-inch inside radius bend on this 90. The code says I have to have 1.5 inches minimum clearance between a handrail, a grip rail, and anything, a post, a wall, anything that you would grab. I went to 2 just to make it's a wide stair. So that's drawn on here. The radius was drawn. This piece of pipe was a little short, so we just gave it a boost. I have also, there's 2 more drawings in there. There's an elevation. That's where you get your heights. And then your plan view gives you your lengths. I don't calculate the length of the radius and all of that. I just draw it to scale right here, and it's calculated. So you measure from the center. It shows this bend line is the nose line of the stair. So if you were out there, there's the landing, the column, it steps down, all of that's drawn on this plate looking straight down. The elevation one, all you really need is to draw 1 tread, and you can take all of your math off of that. But it's a lot easier when you're starting out, and I even do it still, just to draw it full scale, and you know where you're going. Lee will look at my drawings, and he doesn't have to ask me. So it saves us time again. And what we found, basically we have 1 riser that we're dropping in this particular handrail, and we have the leveling out where the ball sits and it meets the post. So I have those 2 numbers added together, and it's 8.5 inches. You can see it there. That's my riser height. That's all I needed for this particular one. It's pretty easy. And then everything else is looking straight down. It was the measurements I took on site. I didn't have to do any real calculations other than then I needed to know for a bending form, you're always bending against the inside edge. You can bend the other way. You can hammer into a swedge. But when you're doing big architectural bars, it's really difficult. You get a lot more drag. The force is easier to apply bending around. So you want to work to the inside of your curves. If you're doing a big curving stair, James has pictures in his portfolio of gorgeous forms, and they built 3 stories of railing. They built around a form, and it was on the inside of the curve. That's the easy way. Avoid doing the other side if at all possible, but you can do it. So we start up here. Actually, we're going to start because it's easier for us to bend this one. We have an indexing point on this rail. It's slit and drift, and then we plug weld it in around. The architect drew this, and our cap, we have a 2-inch swell on the end, and we have a 2-inch ball. He wanted those 2 to match. And I only am coming through with a 3/8 stud to join everything. So, Yes. We slid a hole for a 1-inch drift. Drifted this out and welded that in. You could upset it and just put a small hole in also, if you want to do it that way. I have a bunch of them to do, and this is how I feed my family. So I plug welded that in. That's probably cheating, but it gave me a nice big swell, and it's hot slit, traditionally done. It's just got extra metal added in. You could cut that piece long and forge weld it if you want. But that index is on our form. And we want this to be exactly over a spot on the site. So I need to hold this perfectly in relationship to everything else. There's a stud that we weld into the form. Often we'll just weld a nut underneath and run bolts through with a cordless. But that drops down there. And every time this piece is going to come back to this form and fit in the same place. Whether you're doing whatever you're bending, you want to come back to the same exact spot on your form if you're taking multiple heats and multiple bends. So you need some way to index it. It could just be a silver pencil mark and lining up, and often we do. But for this, we really have to hold it. We're twisting, we're bending, and then we're going to put a lot of force with the 90. The other reason that the 90 is done last is all of this bar is going to stick to this form, and it's easier to clamp it and make that bend. Making a tight bend around a form, it's going to want to pull and slide on you. This way, we're stronger than the resistance in the metal. So, I want to heat that.
Talk about that too.
So when you bend, if you have too much heat, you'll get kinks, you'll get bends you don't want. If there's a hot spot, it's going to bend there first. And so we know it's 2 13/16 to the bottom of the bar where the bend starts, to the center of our bolt. We've got that marked. We're taking like a 3-inch heat, 4-inch heat. We'll line up our marks on, can you see this, James? Whenever you bend, there's 3 points of force involved. If you grab a piece of wire and bend it, you're holding it in two and you're pushing. Whatever you bend, you have to have 3 points of force. When you hammer on the anvil, you're hitting across the anvil and you have this. So, I don't know, maybe I guess that's 2. But to get a bend where you want it, we use 3 points. And the bending forks, we line them up so that the center of this bending fork is grabbing just at that bend, and we pull it around so that becomes this point. We know where we're making our bend. You don't want to have to adjust that very much. You can with a set tool, but make that heat right where you're making the bend, and try to keep your heat behind your bend rather than in front of it. If your heat is in front of a bend, you'll find you lose your force and it bends in front of where you're working, and you can't get there. You've got to hold that, take that heat out, pull it down and come back to the point that you're bending. And then you're going to work. Uh-huh.
That little drawing you made of your 3 points up there, can you fill that out with the tops of the bending fork and the stop?
Yeah. So let's do it right. Yeah.
So a fork always makes a triangle, obviously, when you're trying to bend. You're always going to be in your triangle
These
shape.
two are 1 point, we're calling that.
And so when we come around, we'll put our guard through, and you'll see we line up the top of the triangle to the center line of our bend mark. And that's really important.
We're going to do that right here, and James will show you what we're talking about. And we'll move it until we're at that point, make the bend. You can do it over the anvil. About probably 3/4 of these pieces, I just came from the fire, popped it, and we did it.
So we have our line right here, and we can see that right here. So we come in, make our triangle, center our line with the center of our triangle. That's real important.
And then we're pretty much right there. We've got the twist that's already interfering. Thank you. Brush your work every heat. Keep it clean. If you let it cook on there, it's a lot harder. Even with a power brush, you really tear up your hammer work. So brush every heat. It'll make your arms strong.
Did you make your gas forges?
That one I bought. It was kind of a basket case, and it's made in Canada. It's a really nice forge. The lining was all busted out of it. Part of that is castable fire clay, and part of it is insulation board. And so we just recut it to fit the insulation board on top, put some on the sides, and then we pour the bottoms. We tear up the bottoms of the forges and have to replace them pretty frequently. So I use castable. It's cheap. It's really easy to work with. Needs to dry for, really 48 hours. So that's the only drawback about the castable fire clay. If you're working and you break a forge, you either need another one or you've got to wait. So,
Where did you get that?
there's a guy in Durango that sells the fire clay now, just Eagle Block. Almost all the fireplace, well, I don't know, some fireplace suppliers, if they're selling fire bricks, and he sells the high temp fire bricks that I use in my big forges, he sells it. And I don't know if they brought that in because I always ask or if they always stocked it. You can get it at AP Green. There's places in Denver. If you can buy your kale wool for a gas forge from them, they'll have the castable fire clay. And when we come out, we're going to do a couple things. First thing is, we're not going to bend anything until we have it secure. If we do, we've got to undo that. And we've done that so many times. We know, but we still get anxious. I'll clamp it down. Lee will put some twist, and we'll just make this first little bend. I can hold down with the bending fork. I was a little high right here. Lee can just kind of pull. That's doing it. I'll pull down, he's lifting up. Now it's time for him to grab a crescent. Okay. Whenever you're bending a helix, there's a little bit of twist as you go. The larger the diameter, the less it shows up. Okay. Come in. Okay, that's in.
So I'm not actually doing any pulling. I only work when he's actually working.
Okay. A little more twist. The inside's high.
Yeah.
It's really tempting for the guy with the bar to just wrap that around, but you get ahead of the actual bend, and then you've got to get rid of that.
Cool your clamps real often, especially this style. The C clamps, these ones, they don't get to the spring. Like, we call these the alligator clamps because they hold everything. And we took off all the teeth because they really mar your bar. So on this set, we replaced all the screws. Some have holes, some don't. So all the ones without holes, you see quickly, don't have the teeth on the jaws, for one. Just a real quick marker. And two, make sure you clench them because those springs go and then they don't work well.
Lee, can you turn those towards the camera? Can you explain it again for a second?
So, for one, we've taken off all the teeth on the face here because those mar very quickly. And then two, we index, let me grab. These ones have the teeth and these ones don't. So to know quickly in the shop, this one has teeth because it has a hole. This one is a smooth job because it's smooth. So that's just fast reference. I see it, I know. I don't waste time and I don't work more bar.
That's good.
Under the anvil. Under the anvil. Under the anvil. Went in that hole right there.
Oh, under the anvil.
Want to explain that?
Look at your form. You'll be able to see where you're fit to. That's the spot where I'm just starting to break away. Lee's going to take our heat, just this side of it. You don't need a lot. We're using a small forge. To show you don't need, I have a forge at the shop that's 2 feet long that we do architectural bending in. You can bend a lot more quickly, but for this piece, that's actually too big a forge. There's only this one heat that we could use it in. So we'll take 2 heats and we can show you what we're doing. Basically, the bending is pretty easy. It's getting everything just right, keeping it just right, setting up your form. How long did it take to make this?
I don't know, I made a lot. This one, I had already done the mirror image, and I don't know if he explained how we get there. You can kind of see it cut across the other direction on the form, because it's left and right, and we can't just, you know, bend one upside down and flip it over for the other side. You had to take, and before we even lay down our angle line for what we're bending on, we take and we draw with, just to explain the...
No. So we get our math, we know our top point and our bottom point, and we know this rake. So we can put, and we use a hydraulic hose or a heavy cord, we lay it. Whenever we have a helix, we work through it with something that'll give us a nice line to look at. And so these angles aren't here. It's just the form body. We have this one. We lay this cord on here and we know where we're coming to at the bottom. We can adjust it up and down and make it look very pleasing and get a nice line. Thank you, Lee. That's a really nice trick. If you're doing a 180 especially, a lot of them just look kinked and unpleasant. They're not very attractive. And so for me, I build my form on either side. I've got a rail going up and one going down and my form in the middle. And I put those 2 pieces in, I know where they are, and then I bend around. I use a big hydraulic hose, just clamp it on, pull it around, and I look at it from different angles and I can see what it'll look like on site. Then I mark that and we weld those tabs in. So that's actually made my work look a lot better since I started doing that. When I used to do it and just construct by pure math, I would get kinks because they're not always at the same angle. Okay. Nice.
And off this side.
So now we let the heat go out. Plan what you're going to do. Just like when you're forging, you go back to the fire, think about your next steps, plan this, know what you're doing. We've got plenty of heat here. Our next bend is right here. In the shop, I would use the rosebud. I just heat only what I need right there. We can use the fire. So to do that, I had talked about heat behind your bend. We're not going to heat up here. We're going to heat this area and just right into there. So I've got an arrow, he can see. This stays cool. The heat's right here. And it's real easy to keep this down, but if you have heat and you start pulling, it's going to drop down here, and this spot is going to resist, and so you'll get a hump. And that's really hard to get rid of. So keep your heat back just enough. If you're bending, say you're doing small rings and you're using a torch and doing a wrap, a vine wrap, you want to heat right at the point of tangency with the torch. Keep your heat and feather the flame behind the bend. That's just feather that behind the bend, and it'll lay right in. If you see yourself lifting off behind, you've got too much heat, just clamp it with a pair of tongs real quick. It'll suck the heat out and keep going. And so keep your heat right where you're bending, and you have a lot more success.
Like your previous heat, don't ever go forward, because you can never come back to one section without destroying everything else.
Yeah.
So every time we pull it off the form, we check, flip it, look at the bar. If we don't like it, we heat the exact same spot right then and there.
Do it again.
There's no coming back to it. It's got to be done then, or you have to leave it.
And that's one of the places where Francis' words are in my head. Mm-hmm. I'll get this little sucker. Lee's going to brush that before he puts it in the fire so he's not cooking scale on. Honestly, for years I didn't do that. I heard Dan Boone say that over and over. Brush your work every heat. And it's like, man, I'm just going to use a power brush when I'm done. And then I had a job where I was able to time the two, and I saw a huge difference. This is a lot faster, and you're not brushing for hours too, which is less pleasant. How many people are doing architectural work here, actually? Yeah. You can also, sculptural forms, if you have a product line, lamps, organics, you can actually, there's a lot of things where forms will save you time. We did a lot of sign work in Vail 10 years ago with a guy, and the lighting, when I first started doing it, I was forging the brackets and hangers and stuff for his signs, and he was doing all of the lighting, and it was all off the shelf. And I started making these little bends in conduit, and you can't buy that shape, so I made this form. It has, here's something I learned from Francis. Always write on your jigs and your test pieces what they are, because pretty soon 50 years or 20 years has gone by and you don't know, and if you have to do it again. So this has the client's name. It says a 16-inch heat. So we were doing these in one 16-inch heat. This form locks the conduit in. It's just like a little Greenlee pipe bender you would buy, except tighter radius, and it has this curve. Are you? So my client was really happy. He came up with a beautiful conduit, and we were doing them fast. you couldn't put too many irons in the fire. It was amazing how fast we could bend. So this is made, this jig, you want to hold your work very securely. This jig is made to slide into the vise. It's got a tab on the bottom. Often when you're hammering out here, like Clay's riveting tool, we would put that in the vise, and we would have this tab underneath. We would grab this here, and I can work down here, and it's locked in solid. I would pull it out of the fire, stick the bar in, pull it around. This bending fork has a little helper so it doesn't dent. It could be radial. And I just pull around, and then at this point, this reaches to put that reverse bend. That's the one that I said is really hard, bending in. And this fork, the rest of the bend you can pull by hand, but this fork is necessary for this. So I would put this in place, push down, pull up slightly, push down, pull up, and set it in. This little jig actually made us a lot of money making conduits. The next thing nice about it was they were done hot, and we would put a finish on and it would show that work. So there's all kinds of different forms. Are you ready? Nope. We make a lot of rings. I have these in several diameters. This block is adjustable for the width of the stock. Clamp one end, pull around, slide it, clamp it, and pull. Just clamp it with a pair of tongs. It's in the vise. Grab it, pull around, and you can finish your bend and real quick. Yep. He's going to wait till we get all these clamps back on. Yep. Yep. Okay, just in a fold, and that's good. So now the bottom lamination of our handrail has a level, a helical, it comes out at a 45, a helical bend, and it's straight rake, and now it's level. The last bend in this is the 90. We'll let this heat go out. Point of tangency, the place where it hits the circle, is where your bend starts. So we'll heat to there, going that way. Seems obvious, but arrows are nice.
So Rod, on your sign tracks, what were you using for conduit?
Half-inch pipe, I think, for that one. We used pipe for all of the conduit. I didn't use EMT. no ungalvanized, just black. Do a good finish on it, and it was just right. And we made, I don't know how many of those. And that same fixture then, he started using that lighting on a lot of other sign brackets, and we would make 42 inches long for some really big signs, and down to not much longer than that for him, 18 or 20 inches. And so that tool has been used for years. We just did one for him a couple years ago after a long period, and I pulled that for him out, and there it was, ready to go. Not on the same die. I've made it for 3/4 and half. And the 3/4 was a different pattern. They were more of a big arc that almost scrolled in. And sure. There's that.
What did you use to make that channel?
Piece of pipe, and I ripped it. Plasma.
What was the question?
What's the convex made from?
What was the answer?
A piece of pipe ripped. So I bent the pipe first. That's a hard shape to bend, the anaclastic shape. It's real easy to bend in pipe. So bend it first, find your centers. You know how you can find the center line on a bent piece of pipe? Take it on the concrete and go like this. Flip it over. Okay. You don't want to do this on a nice finished piece of metal, but if you, a down and dirty, quick way to find the center, and I don't do it this way, I have a different way, but this seemed obvious. You take your bent piece of pipe, you rub it along the floor, there's only one point of contact. The bottom of that radius, that's the center line. Flip it over, do the same thing. Really what I do, I put it on the table, I put an equal distance height, another piece of pipe, and I rub a fine file across it. But that sounded pretty cool. So I marked that, split it, and I had my anaclastic shape, very quick and easy, and a little grinder work. You could do that for a finished product too. I've made some pieces where I wanted that sweet inside form and not a big budget, and so I formed it as a pipe and cut my part out of it and had it very quickly. Because it's easy to form pipe. You have more equal tension against all sides. The inside's going to upset, the outside's going to stretch when you make a bend, whether it's in a piece of pipe, square bar, rectangle. I don't know, round, I don't. No. Bend it around a form. And I have a Greenlee pipe bender. I have a whole bunch of little hand conduit benders. And you can use those. I've made lots of dies. I have big heavy dies for bending like 2-inch solid, real tight. We did a piece of structural, are you ready?
What?
Are you ready? Did a piece of structural barbed wire. The wire was 1.5 inch solid twisted. The barbs were 1.25 inch. And to make that tight bend, that's a really tight bend, the 1.25 inch around 1.5 inch, and I wanted 1 5/8 ID. So I've got a really big gear motor, and I did my 3 points, and I had a center mandrel. I did it hot, and I was able to bend that 1.25 inches around, make the barbs, pull them off. We hot cut them off, just like barbed wire. Go ahead and take that little. There's a little bit of twist happening. Lee's going to fix that before we go far.
So Rod, on your big bending fork, is there like any special kind of steel or is it just mild steel?
These are just mild steel, A36 flat bar. I used to build them single-sided. It was just enough. And I made them out of solid. That little piece that's going around is solid. I made that a long time ago. We added these straps because I needed to repair a fork in the middle of a job, and it's like, that's a quick way. It did it, realized I should have put that on to start with. And so the strap actually reinforces the strength of the tube. Still not a lot of metal there. It's pretty light. It's very strong. We've got 10 of these. And some of them are pretty old. They're a little tweaked. They've been repaired. But like that pair out there that's our, hopefully, final design on bending forks. They work well. Sometimes when I'm working with a more refined finished surface, we'll put wheels on, like that little fork that's going around has the angle. We'll do that. You could make a tiny Hausfeld bender. I used to make those all the time by taking make your ring that you want to form around, say this is 2 feet, and then come in the middle, come out with a piece of angle so it's strong enough to do work. Put a hole here on top of this, so shim this up in section. You've got your form, got your angle underneath. It's got a hole for a little roller. Piece of pipe that's a spacer that's a little taller than your form and the work, and then come across. Put a bolt through there, and you've got a baby Hausfeld bender. You can bend radiuses, the exact radius you want all the time with spring bout. Now I have a lathe. That's such a cool tool. I used to scavenge and find things. I love junkyards. I'd go and see what kind of things I could find, and I just collect steel. It's a disease, and you get a big pile out back. But now I just use mild steel mostly. 4140 makes really nice rollers, and I can turn them on my lathe. I have a little Shop Outfitters in Wyoming. they sell a little bender. We bought that before we moved from Florida. So over 20 years ago, bought that thing. I'm still using it. I've done some tune-ups on it. It's got a full set of dies up to 3-inch, and then I've supplemented that. I've made more tool racks on it, and on that I have dies. Here's a nice one. This same tool, bend it just like this, and put V-blocks. Get rid of this. I'll get out of the way in just a second, James. So your pivot pin's over here. And you can bend on the diamond. We did a beautiful vanity in Ridgeway a few years ago, and there were arches, square bar, upsets on the ends. And then this was slit and drift, shouldered out, down here as well. And these were bent 1-inch square, I think, hammered bar. And we knocked that form out in a heartbeat, just like this, but it was flat, it was angle. We bent it around and it was done. You know, you can hammer those to shape, but we needed 2 to match. The guy that was my boss was Howard McCall, an amazing blacksmith.
This one they have.
Yeah, okay, here's a bending form from this shop. And Howard's a nuclear engineer. He liked things really precise. It was fun to work for him, but I mean, those bends, he was looking, he just started smiling at me. We had indexing marks on our forms, so where we slit and drift, we had marks for that. My layout was built right in. It was really easy. Just when we finished bending, while it was still hot, I could punch, and I got my center punch marks right there. Then after we did our bends, I think we bent one first and slit and drift, then we slit and drift and bent the other one after. But was able to make them just exactly the same without upsetting or drawing out. And, you know, so that angle, we've bent a lot of things on the diamond, square, and you can bend round in that same type of form. Sometimes you'll want to bend something really thin that's polished, a piece of stainless steel or something. If you can bend that in angle amazingly, you don't need a full half diameter die. Try it and see, but you can get away with angles. So we have buckets of V-blocks. We use them on the hammer, we use them on the press, we set up and work quite a bit of stuff on the diamond. It makes it a lot more rich in detail, and the only hard thing is assembly. So if you make a bunch of V-blocks, they're right there underneath the table. Those aren't cut angles, little straps, weld them together. There's a V-block for assembly. You have 50 of those, you can build a lot of rail quickly. You don't need that many, you can keep reusing and moving, but if you're doing a lot, it's worth making them. And we use those, we'll tack them onto our forms, and we do our diamond bending. Yep. Do we have any pry tool?
Underneath.
So obviously this is cooled onto the form. I was blabbing instead of watching. Not that easy. You ready?
Rod, have you bent square tubing with that jig?
Yes.
They won't twist on you?
No. No, you can bend square tubing. I have little spool dies that I've made for that shop outfitter to bend. They sell them too now. So that's the bottom half of the railing cap. In section, we also have cap rail that we've forged out. And we rivet those together. And so that's our 2-bar cap. We make a lot of people make that cap. It's pretty nice. The form was made for the largest bar, the cap. The math, the 4-inch, this is, I don't know, it's on there. I believe it's 14 5/8, this little drum. And so that's the cap. We have shims. These things right here, there's a whole bunch of them welded in. That holds the bottom, the 5/8 by 1, over 1/4 of an inch from that edge. So that when we bend the next bar, it'll sit over the top. We'll bend right on top of that piece we just did. There's another thing that's really important. If you took these off and you bent the 2 bars in the same exact form, but on the same plane, they wouldn't mate. They wouldn't mate. When
You've got a cold one there.
yeah. This bend is, here's the pivot point, the center of the radius, someplace down here, and it bends. So this is a tighter radius than this. The bar that lays on top of it has an entirely different radius. And I'm embarrassed to say, I've done that a couple times without thinking, pulled off and bent another bar that had to lay on. It's like, oh man, that was dumb. Yeah, oops. So we bend on top of it, so we start at the bottom and work our way up when we're bending these. I did one with Smith Boone years ago. It was a 4-bar cap. It was massive. It was a chunk of metal like this. It was a handrail. And we stacked all those babies and bent them, and it turned out sweet. I mean, they just laid together. And the joinery was all traditional. They tongued together with rivets through. We built that stuff. Some on site. We went up to measure the stair, and it had some kinks. It wasn't a regular form. And I had told him, well, I'll just make one form, we'll take it back, build all these sections and put them together. And we started plumbing down, and the architect had a constant radius drawn. And the stair had 3 main radiuses and then the connecting kinks. And so we had to replicate that entire stair. It was over 30 feet long, and build all this. It was heavy rail. That rail was massive. And so we did it right on site. Had to build a jig on the structural steel because we just didn't have time. We built that whole railing in 45 days, Amos? Something like that? 60? I mean, it wasn't much time for, Amos was there. And we built that fixture right on the stair stringer, inside and out, bent all of those bars, and the bottom rail set right on the wood molding, so we took all that back, built it in the shop, and brought it, and it fit beautifully. But you want to stack each lamination as you go, because, and then if you have say you have this and it comes down, and then it bends level. Common handrail thing. Levels at the top, comes down the rake, levels at the bottom. If you stack 2 or 3 layers, you know, the bend points are changing drastically. You'll start getting gaps and your points won't line up. So just bend them on top of one another and you can overcome that. Any questions on this?
Best scroll jig I ever saw.
Raj, if you're doing laminations that are not all the same width, if your cap is wider or skinnier, how do you adapt your jig?
It's right here.
Or were you going to do that?
Yeah, well,
Here, go.
there. Yeah. So John, this lower lamination is shimmed out 1/4 of an inch from the drum, from the pipe, from our straight points. And then the top, there's a shim. And the shim is only, it's slightly shorter. It's 1/2 inch. This bar is 5/8 high. So when this one comes on and we come around, we'll be against this inner form. So we're held out automatically 1/4 inch. I think those are the main points on this. I thought we were going to take just a little longer to do this first one.
Too efficient.
We've done a lot of these in the last
We've done a lot of these. And actually, before these, we did very tight helical bends on the interior railing. And last year, I showed that form here. And that one required extremely precise bending. And a lot of attention. We spent 2 weeks making each of those, well, not each, but the 3 forms, and then did a series of bends. We had a 3-bar top cap and a bottom rail. The bottom rail set tight against the wood. It was all assembled traditionally. It needed to fit perfectly, and it did. But it was a lot of work. We did this. One of the things you'll find, your bars are going to shrink onto your form. We showed you that accidentally. So get them off while you still have heat.
They click, you hear it click, and then the clicking really slows down, and you kind of just, after doing so many, you'll really kind of tell, you can listen, and it'll tell you when to start. So
If you have color, leave it on, because you'll change your piece taking it off. But as soon as the color's gone, you can get it off of the form, and you're ready to cool this. When we're doing production bending, we have air close by. We cool our forms. It's amazing, part to part. Not on something like this, but if we had scrolls, and we're rocking and rolling. I mean, we can really crank out a lot of scrolls. That form will get so hot that they'll be different size. And sometimes that's okay, but Clay said something. If it's in a box, it's not. If you have 2 picket, you're in a box. That scroll's got to be just right. And so we cool the forms with air. We quench our clamps. And basically, those are the things that we're watching for. Often, I'll just forge completely on the anvil if I can do that. I don't build the forms. My scrolls, I can turn them that way, and I enjoy that so much. It's really a pleasure. But when I'm trying to stay on budget, stay on schedule, the forms are the only way that we can produce a large volume accurately and make money at it. And so they're definitely worth their making. We have many forms like this. Gordo, I assume there's some of...
That was actually for the project we did.
For the sundial,
Oh, okay, yeah. We make these, we keep these. we paint the radius on it and hang them up and use them over and over. When I'm designing, I'll look and see if I have something within a 1/4 inch of the radius I'm looking for. And they're awesome. So you can bend around this. You can do it on the anvil. You could make just a small Now you're doing what I said not to do first, but you're hammering into a swedge. That works well. You can stand there and you can turn a 3-foot diameter just with your, and you could do it on the step of the anvil with a hammer. And there you've got to be more accurate with your eyeball. But you can turn a really nice round arc right there. So dress that so it's not sharp. Clean off any hammer marks, and you can produce a real pretty curved shape right there. You don't need all the tools. Depends on what it has to do.
Have this one on. Talk about that. What's your hand?
Yeah.
Rob, will you be talking about your drawing that's over here later on?
Actually, I'll do that right now. Let's go back to this layout. Thank you, James. So all of the math for the bending form we took off of those 2 drawings. This is the plan view. So here's the 4-inch pipe that's drawn on the steel plate. The stair tread, because that's the bend. Here's another nosing, just so I know where I am. And then here's the last nosing. Code says that a handrail has to go from nose to nose on a stair, except you can end with a volute or a post on the bottom tread. So this one does that. It ends center tread here. And because of walkways, we came in off of this edge. The walkway's narrower than the stairs. Another thing that I drew, you'll see on the elevation drawing, I have, at the bottom of it, I have a long tread drawn. That's the tread from here to here. I didn't use much of it on this particular railing, but there were a similar set that had more stairs going down. So this same stair, it has the same riser height, but the run is longer because it's on a 45, the diagonal. And so this drawing gave me the math that I needed to create down here on the bottom of your drawing. That's this tread. This tread is a view from here to here. I drew the post in the center. And I also drew the level. I knew what I wanted to put on the end, what I thought was a pleasing termination. I drew that here. So I got my math for the form using this rise, and then basically one standard tread riser. And so that equaled the 8.5 inches that I have between the level at the bottom and the level at the top. If you had more treads in there, it would be a taller number and your form would be longer. The basic things that you need when you go out to measure a stair rail also include the code. I didn't talk about that earlier. And So when you go there, you want to know it in your head. If you don't, take a copy of it with you. So when you're looking at it to measure, like we do jobs far away, and I did a job in Canada a few years ago, and I had to learn their code, and it's different. It's a lot more stringent than ours. And so I knew that code when I went there, and I encountered some things that were difficult to interpret, but I had copies of it. The builder and I hashed it out, and we resolved that. But I had the code with me, so I knew what the rules of the game were, what I had to do, and that made making my measurements a lot easier. I didn't have to measure everything. I had to measure what related to the railing. Does that make sense? Lee's setting up. We're going to tack the bar that we just bent to this form to hold it in place. We'll do that and get it ready for our next bend. While he's doing that, I'm going to light the little fire.
You only have 10 minutes.
11:45.
We're pretty much out of it.
Are we? Okay, then I'm not going to do that. Okay.
It's still welded on for after lunch.
When you're bending rings, the circumference of the ring is measured at the center line of your bar for the length. Anytime you're bending a bar, if you're bending a square bar, a rectangular bar, a round bar, the length is at the center line. So if you have a 1-inch round or 1-inch square, you have your ID plus 1 inch, 2 halves. And that's your, so you can calculate that. Take the diameter, center line diameter times pi, and that's your cut length for that particular ring. It's always at the center. That's an important one to know. A lot of guys bend over and then cut them, and I've done that. And then you have to flatten it and make those up. But if you know the length, and it comes out right every time. Obviously, if you do a small diameter ring, we bend a lot of 3/4 inch round rings for pulls and knobs, door knockers, and they're 6 inches ID. So when they come together, square cuts don't butt. Those are beveled. And I know what that is now. I kind of forged that in, upset it a little bit. But your length is determined at the center line of your diameter.
Rob, have you run into any issues with the code concerning, like you said, the handrail is generally goes from nose to bottom nose, but the guard, as I understand, isn't required to go that far down. You run into any weird issues where they say the guard doesn't have to go down to anything more than
30 inches.
off the floor?
Yes. Code treats handrail and guardrail as two separate issues. They are. The guardrail prevents someone from falling through an opening. You can have a guardrail when stairs aren't involved. You have a second-story balcony, and that's not a handrail, that's a guardrail. It's supposed to be, anytime you're above 30 inches or 3 rises, you have to have a guardrail. So on that French railing that I was talking about, when we came down to the bottom, I switched from the pattern that we used throughout the entire stair to a very large scroll with a acanthus leaf in bronze and stuff. I wasn't required to reject a 4-inch sphere at the bottom because I was lower than 30 inches. So your code requirements for a guardrail change at that lower height. You don't have to have it. So then it just becomes support for the rest of your structure. And on the eastern seaboard, your bottom rail has to reject a 2-inch sphere because they have high-rise hotels and spring break and kids dropping bottles off. So your bottom rail has to be lower than 2 inches. so a beer bottle won't roll under it. Here, if you make your railing that low, nobody can shovel their deck. Even 4 inches is pretty uncivilized, honestly, when you're shoveling. But that is our code here. And we now have a unified code throughout the country that most municipalities have adopted. And I have a copy of it. But wherever you go, you need to know. If you, for instance, sold handrails to the Catholic Church, they could have their own code. And I encountered that years ago. I don't know if they still do. And their code exceeded the building code, but I needed to know that. And I found out, fortunately, before I built everything. And it was a couple little things that they required. Now, most of the codes have adopted what they wanted then. And we have the ADA, the American Disability Act, which superseded all of the building codes for a long time. Most of the codes have been brought to that standard to make it accessible for everyone. And so, but you really do want to know, and the Canadian codes are tough. You can't, I think at 3 floors, your railing becomes 5 feet high. Your guards.
Can't have more than 9/16 protruding off of any point, because then it acts as a ladder. So if you have like a picket that we had round to square with a twist, our round diameter to our diamond diameter couldn't be greater than 9/16. It was
There's a lot of things to look at, but you know, and I started putting this together, and the inspector told me basically he would be watching for me. So we made sure he did. I mean, he was very upfront. I wasn't really welcome to work in his borough, but we met his standards, and it worked just fine. But there were a lot of codes that I didn't know about, and I would have really blundered taking a semi of railing to Canada and not meeting code. That doesn't bank well.
Rod, one of the advantages of belonging to NOMA is if you got a code question, you can post it on their email server and you'll get answers and you'll get clarification.
Yeah, that's an excellent group. If you're doing architectural and new to the game, I would join NOMA as well as Abana. They're a great bunch of guys. They are very helpful. It's just like this group, and they'll help you with the professional issues. And they did. When we were young in Florida, there were a couple times where I felt rescued when I dealt with those guys. They were really great.
Put this on real quick.
Yeah.
Explain what we're doing.
We're pretty well fixed at the bottom, so we don't have to do much weld here. He's going to put a couple little tacks on, big tacks on.
Big tacks. Because as you work the next layer, the layer underneath always wants to bubble up and out.
It's going to get hot.
Weld, because it's going to expand, obviously, between your 2 welds or 2 points that you have. It'll bubble up. So I put them, it's easy to grind, it's easy to sand. Put them fairly close and fairly large, because with the heat, you'll hear them snap, and then you're in trouble. So keep lots of weld on it, actually. If I can go. Oh, I have my wiring.
There you are. You need pliers.
Oh, I got it.
Where'd the files go? Gordo?
That's killing me.
Over here, okay.
He was looking for a file.
There. I think you got it.
Will a big wheel burn
That's pretty good, Scott. I don't know if you guys have these. These are wonderful tools. Caleb Coleman turned me onto this. He came in my shop and I was hanging on to a dead blow rawhide hammer that was really expensive that I didn't want to replace. And he's like, Rod. And like a week later, one of these showed up in the mail. And
24 bucks at HammerSource.
yeah, hammersource.com. And they sell the replacement tips. They're a little slow, so I bought these. We use them up. I bought these at McMaster Car because they're fast. But they're like $9 for the tips, and HammerSource is less. I don't know what they are. But you want one of these. Doing,
About 8 sizes.
yeah.
The little one's really handy.
Really sweet. In fact, there's some set tools out there on the table, and I've got a new design. It's going to be one of these on a set tool so that we can get in and really...
How much for the tips?
They're less than $8 from that hammersource.com. And you can wail on your work and not mess it up. They're great for straightening your work, not adding more hammer texture. On a really solid table, that's going to lay you down quickly. So how much more time do we have?
It's noon, we were supposed
Okay.
to have lunch.
Yeah, then, okay.
And I think yeah, and then lunch
Okay.
from noon to 1.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah.